This is an honest review of the tabletop role-playing game Shadowdark. It is what is called an OSR game, Old School Renaissance, which just means people recreated the earliest RPGs from the 1970s because they liked them better, back to basics as it were. And truthfully, most of them just take the old Dungeons & Dragons rules and add their own house rules. But there was a lot lacking from those old games, so you had to make up a lot of your own rules. And it's not surprising that these games have sprung up, because the current editions of the actual Dungeons & Dragons games suck. Just so bad. They're owned by Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, and they have at the same time simplified the game so that it plays more like a generic video game, where all the characters are identical and now void of anything that makes them special, yet somehow managed to add so much unnecessary shit as to make the game nearly unplayable. But the quality of those OSR games has been all over the place since they started back in the 2000s. A lot of them aren't very good, but you may have seen all the fanfare about Shadowdark. Is it well deserved? Well, that will totally depend on how you and your friends play tabletop RPGs. Shadowdark does a good job of stripping down the core mechanics, so playtime and combat are quick and easy. But the best part is the monsters, because that's what fantasy games are all about. They strip them all down to a 2 or 3 sentence description. The bad thing is there's almost no pictures, so you'll probably have to find yourself searching up images online so you can see what these things are. Most of the monsters are taken straight from Dungeons & Dragons. As a side note, Shadowdark has numerous copyright violations in this book because a lot of the monsters were created specifically for D&D. They are not just generic goblins or trolls, so this is a major infringement of intellectual property. And Hasbro is pretty scummy. They actually sent some thugs to a guy's house last year because he was accidentally sold some new Magic the Gathering cards a week before their official release. So I would not put it past them to try and knock off some of the popular competition. But who knows? Maybe a lot of the other clones have gotten away with it too, so they really wouldn't have a precedence. But the monster factor I liked most was that they simplified all the monsters. Everybody gets 1 or 2 special attacks or abilities, and that's it. Keeps everything flowing smoothly gameplay-wise. It feels like a lot of the old PC role-playing games from the 80s and 90s. Because of limited memory and processing back then, the graphics of monsters would get recycled, but they would be distinguished by having a different title or special ability. That's what makes Shadowdark better than the other OSR games to me. But along the same lines as those old games, it extremely limits what you can have on your character with very few equipment slots. The main thing that sets it apart is that no player characters can see in the dark, so you have to always have a light source with you at night or when you're in dark dungeons, and you use a real-world timer with a regular torch lasting an actual hour. All the monsters can see in the dark, hate light, and will try to extinguish your light sources, and the monsters gain massive advantage attacking characters in the dark. This is good and bad. It makes for much more intense gameplay, really ramps up the horror, and a nice change up from regular adventuring games. But be honest, if you've played D&D before, the first thing your players will do is figure out 50 ways to work around this game mechanic, thus rendering it useless. So your game master would have to shut that all down and make you play within that limiting nature. And that is where Shadowdark's greatest failure lies. It is also designed as a meat grinder game. Your characters will die, and it has been suggested that you roll up a few characters at once, so you can switch over with little stoppage of the game. You can play your games however you want, but most people don't understand why these are very bad things. In general, an RPG is simply collaborative storytelling. When you force mechanics onto your players, and with the very nature of meatgrinder games, it changes it from collaborative to the players versus the game master. So it is no longer a role-playing game, and there is no room for character development because you're going to die sooner rather than later. Lots of people will argue with me, but I've seen it happen over and over, dozens and dozens of times. Players will get bored and lose interest in the game because there is no character attachment. But you don't have to play the game that way. But you do have to make sure everyone is on board with the style of gameplay that you choose. Because role-playing games have been around for over 50 years now, and the main inspiration for meatgrinder games is the D&D module Tomb of Horrors, which Gary Gygax purposely created to kill everyone in the adventuring party because the players had become egotistical and said there was no challenge that they couldn't best. And with that, a million shitty game masters were born. So would I recommend Shadowdark? For veteran players, this is the best of the OSR games. But your game master is going to have to do a lot of work tweaking the system to your house rules and playing style. One example is that character stats and bonuses stop at 18, but if you roll well, you can start the game with a stat of 20. And if you actually play a long campaign, you can even raise it all the way up to 28, but it really doesn't matter if you have rules lawyers at your table who insist on no changes to the game and keeping that 18 limit. And there's only the 4 classic character types of fighter, thief, wizard, and cleric, so you'll have to create any new ones. I, personally, am going to make a few modules for Shadowdark and put them online for free, because it's still a very new game, and all the player-generated content looks pretty generic and boring. And like I said, I do like the new monsters. But I wouldn't run a campaign of it myself without throwing out half the rules that make it distinctly Shadowdark. I'm an author. My very nature is storytelling, so I don't find meatgrinder games fun on an extended basis. You know, if that's what you're really determined to play, go check out Paranoia. That is the perfect meatgrinder game. Would I recommend Shadowdark to new players just getting into tabletop role-playing? No. And it's for the same reason that, even though I have made stuff for the Call of Cthulhu game, I do not recommend it to new players either, because it is also a meatgrinder game. If you are just learning how to run a role-playing game, and you start with these types, more than likely you will carry that bad mentality of adversarial gameplay with you into any other RPGs you may play down the line. Call of Cthulhu game masters are just some of the worst in the field. I'm sorry, it's just true. The best thing you can do as a new tabletop role player is download the Shadowdark starter rules for free from their website. And you can go check out the old rules for basic Dungeons & Dragons, what is also known as the Red Box, which all the OSR games are based on. You can find a free copy of it online at the Internet Archive, or probably can grab a free PDF of it floating around somewhere. Then you can compare the two and decide if you want to use one or the other. And if you're a regular gamer, I'm talking video games now, the other more advanced systems are not difficult to learn. You already understand character stats and special abilities and the complex button mashing you have to do because so many modern games use them. So don't let the D&D nerds convince you that the other games are too much for you to start off with. If you're a kid and you've played Minecraft or Roblox, you can easily learn most tabletop role-playing games. And that's all I got for you. So be sure to subscribe for more horror, occult, and Lovecraft madness. Until next time, Cthulhu.IT.